Hello, in this video I want to show you how we can use the trim tool in Houdini Engine. So here I have a scene with already like a basic mesh, so I made this in Pro Builder, so I can always edit this later on. And I want to now use the trim technique that we often use in games to texture this. So this is a trim texture, and what we will do is these strokes are tileable, and we will basically take one of the strokes here and then place it on one of the primitives here. So normally this would be like a very intense process if you do this manually. So you will have to take the UV from the surface and place it and scale it on the right place here. So we will have a tool, so we can drag and drop the trim tool in here. So by default, it is this really basic shape, and we can of course plug in our own shapes. So here in the settings, we can then here use an input, so we can add a slot, and then we can use my cube here, which is cube 14, and then use this in here. So now I have the same result here. Now before I continue, maybe I can already start adding a certain material on here. So we can go to materials, and then we can plug in here a Unity material. So I already built here a checker pattern. So by default, this is already what we will get out of the box. So if I here take a look at my texture, we can see that the UVs are specifically placed in a certain area, so it matches the strokes or the trim strokes. Now let's get back to the tool, and then we can go to UV settings. So the first slider is the fitting percentage, so we can play around with that, and we should see some changes here. So you can clearly see if I change my slider, it will get different areas here of this trim texture based on the size, of course. You can also here have some control in the area. So as you can see, this can also help in some cases to make this a bit better. Then we can also here limit the text density. So in some cases, the areas of the text density might not be good enough, so we can limit that. And here we are limiting on a specific value, so 0.3. So if I would increase this, we can have or filter out some areas where we want to change the text density. So it's up to you if you want to turn this on or off. Then I've also built a slider for the height of the UV shells, so we can increase this or lower this. So if I would increase this, we can see that it is sort of like go over its trim boundaries, and also you can see the other trim here. So we can also lower this, and then it will sort of like, and then it will go a bit out of the trim values. So we can play around with that. So normally keeping it around 1 should be good enough. And then we can here have a trim strokes isolation. So this value will represent what trim strokes to use. So here in this case, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different trim values. So if I would now fill in value 0, that means the first stroke. So 0 is here the first stroke. So we can only use the first stroke for this model. So if I want to use only the last one, I have to fill in 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I fill in 4, we will then only see the green object here. But of course, we can use multiple ones. So we can, for example, say 0, space 1, space 2. And then it will only use the first 3 strokes here. So you can see we're using the orange and the blue here. So this is a way on controlling this a bit more. So if we leave this empty, we will use the full set here. Then there is also some options for auto UVing. So we will use the input model here, and we're going to do a auto unwrapping process here for the trim texture. So if you don't want that, you can disable this in case you already have a nice UV here. Further here, if you have a more complicated object, we can search for seams based on the angle value. So in this case, it's 30. So every time we have like this hard edge, we will basically have a seam for my UVs. So we can play around with that. We can also rectify UV. So in case you have more rounded objects, we can then rectify the UV. I can also here view my seams. So I build a small viewer here, so you can see everywhere where we have this red border. This is my UV theme, so we can quickly preview UVs if we for example have a much complicated object. It's great to then see where the seams are. Then let's go to geometry here, so we can also do a auto beveling. So we bevel here the object. Maybe we can make this a bit less. I think it's too much. We can also increase the divisions here and make it more nicer. So this will just make the object, as you can see, a bit more rounder here around the edges. So that can be helpful in some cases. Then further we then have the normal angle. So this is calculating the normals, and then we also have Houdini triangulate, and then we also have object alignment. So as you can see, this is actually my pivot of my object. But if I would set this to none, it will actually copy paste the original position of my object. So I prefer to keep this in the center, or if you want the pivot to be at the bottom, we can, for example, do this. So the pivot is at the bottom. Let's back to center. So then here we have the material, and then we have our custom trim. So now I'm basically using the trim that is built in my tool, but I want to, of course, use my own trim textures. So for example, here, the sci-fi material that I made, I want to use that in my tool. So then I have to use my custom trims here. So I'm going to have to fill in here my texture, and the texture will look like this. So here I have a couple versions of that. So we will have to make something like an ID map, so very colorful representations of the different strokes. So this is then here my trim, and each line is then basically a different color. So as you can see, each line is just a different color. So if I have different layouts like this or this, you can just plug that in the tool and it will automatically recognize that this is a different trim. So in this case, I have my sci-fi trim sheet here, and I can just use my ID map here that I created for that. So here in my tool, I'm going to enable custom trim. So in my case here again, I'm going to use that trim layout. So once that is in here, we can then just click initialize, and in the background, it will automatically then update our texture. So we're going to have to go back to my material. I'm going to swap here the material, and now we can clearly see that the trims are working. So I have this part here that is nicely on top here. So this is then my trim in action. So I can go back to my UV settings. I can play around here with some of the fitting percentages, and then we can try to find the look that I want. Play around with the spacing. So as you can see, it's zooming in and zooming out here on the UV trim. So maybe we can like zoom in a bit more. And we can always go back and forward between my actual model state. So here I'm going to maybe select this, maybe move this around, and I actually have to rebuild here. So updating the 3D geometry, and you can see that it will automatically then also update the trim here. As you can see here, we can model something with ProBuilder, and I can quickly have the trim sheet on this object as well to already make this usable in your game. And that was basically what I wanted to show in this video. So I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for watching.